Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and to help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness. And y'all, I know we had an election. I know folks have feelings, and we're going to talk about feelings today. We're also going to talk about how the election impacts Texas, and we're going to talk about what Texans of faith can do next. All of that with Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead, in just a moment. But for now, I want to do a quick check-in with you, the listeners. I know everyone has feelings. I have feelings. Some may be excited, some are devastated, but the reality is we are the same community we were yesterday. And politics does not define the entirety of our lives. I hope you'll find some time today, this week, to go outside and touch some grass, hug a friend, walk the dog, volunteer at a food pantry, watch the kids' soccer game. I know that one might be aimed at me. I'm going through all of this with you. And I work in this space, and I'm going to need a few days to decompress and step away. And I know many of you might be feeling the same way. To find an opportunity to rest, to focus, to recharge our body, soul, and spirit. A few days or even a few weeks is fine, but y'all, this isn't a time to hide because our communities, our neighbors, and our democracy need us. What's clear in this divided political sphere is that we all need to be more willing to engage in conversations, to listen, to learn, and then, yes, to advocate, hopefully after finding and developing some common ground in our own communities. So take the time that you need. Take care of yourself, check in on your friends and neighbors, and then come back refreshed and ready because Texans of faith have some significant work to do in the coming months to protect our communities and neighbors, and we're going to need each of you. As always, Texas Impact has tools for all of this on our website at texasimpact.org, and I especially want to plug our teams. I hope you'll consider joining one of the teams because they're communities of people who care about issues that you care about, and I feel like we need a little extra community these days. So learn more and sign up for one of the teams at texasimpact.org. So with that, I hope you enjoy this week's conversation with Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead. Joining us for today's conversation is Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead. B, I'm glad you're with us today.
Me too.
There has been so much happen in the world since the last time we talked on Weekly Witness. How are you feeling?
Well, kind of tired, honestly. It's been a lot of thinking and talking and processing, but in general, pretty good. I had a nice lunch.
Love that for you. There has definitely been a lot of thinking and processing and talking about feelings, which, we love to do here on this program. But one of the things, obviously there was a presidential election that took place this week and elections up and down the ballot. I know folks were feeling things. Some were ecstatic and some were terrified and everything in between. But the morning after, you had a chance to be a part of an event in San Antonio with faith leaders from the San Antonio area. That was probably good for the soul to be with people that morning. Talk to us about that event. How were the vibes? How was everybody feeling?
It was absolutely good for my soul. And what people who were there said was it was good for their souls too. I will be honest, when I woke up on Wednesday morning, I was a little bit cranky. And also I had to get up pretty early so we can go to San Antonio. And I was not 100% convinced that I had made the right call saying that we would participate in an event.
We'll chat about that.
In another city that started at 9:00 in the morning. And by the time it was over, I was so happy. I was feeling so much better, so much more centered. We are so blessed in this state to have so many really wise and loving faith leaders. And every time I get to be around them, like the ones in San Antonio, it just makes me feel so much better about things. The event in San Antonio was put on primarily by the Interfaith San Antonio Alliance and the San Antonio Peace Center, and they invited Texas Impact to participate, which was, great. I was certainly very happy to do so. We helped with planning who was going to do the speaking, but of course, you can't, when you have a coalition type event, you're always amazed at who the different coalition partners bring to speak that you maybe didn't know before. I got introduced to people who I didn't know at all, and I was really excited that the faith leaders were meeting people that they hadn't known until the event. So this is just all together. Sorry, I'm being a little bit fanny about it, but it was really fun. It was really fun.
I will say, if we're doing confession time right now, so listeners know if they weren't on the call, is the San Antonio event was from 9 to 10-ish, and then we had another 2 hours where faith leaders from throughout Texas came on and offered reflections and prayers. And if you listened to the episode last week with Reverend Ann Helmke, one of the things she talked to us about was making plans for Election Day, of things you needed to process and all of those things. And my plan, I can't remember if I said it on the episode or after, was I want to take the morning off. And then we got to staff meeting on Monday, and you were like, hey, you're going to moderate this thing from 9 to noon. And in my head, I was like, well, that's not taking off. So I was slightly irritated about having to be on Zoom for 3 hours on the morning after I was planning an all night election watch party. But also, like, good to be in that community and good to hear from and be a part of a conversation about how folks were feeling and how we're looking going forward and all those things. So community is important, and I hope everybody's had a chance to be a part of community. I said it several times during that conversation. I know you've said several things, is for many people, we need a few minutes, and we need to go outside and touch some grass and, watch a soccer game and do things that have nothing to do with public policy. And so I hope everybody is taking care of themselves and doing all of those things. But there has been a lot of talk over the course of the last couple days, the last weeks, frankly, about the importance of understanding our community. What do you take that to mean, and what role does the faith community play in that?
Well, so there was one of the speakers at the San Antonio event, Shakare, who is the founder of Dream Week San Antonio, which is a really cool thing. I would encourage people to look it up. But he's from Nigeria, and he said, in Nigeria, we have a saying, when two siblings are fighting, both of them are wrong. And that was so important to me, that reminder that everybody comes into the public space, into the electoral space, into the policy space with their own perspective, and they believe that they are the one and everybody else is the other. But what you have to understand is every single person feels that way. So understanding the community doesn't mean here's me and the community is everybody else out there, and I, as the center of the community, need to understand the periphery. It's that each person is part of that kind of the totality of the community. You need to understand all of the other parts of it and your own self as a part of it. And I think, when you say that, it sounds like, when I say it, it sounds like something, that like, well, duh, of course. But I think we lose sight of that daily. We lose sight of it daily in our communication, even like with our family members. Of course, we center ourselves in the way that we communicate and the way that we evaluate other people's actions. How does it impact me? We don't, it's not a question of sublimating that perception of self. It's understanding that every other person has that same perception, and that we can't make policy together if we all are assuming that we're the one main entity that the policy is made for. So I think that's what I'm talking about understanding your community, not just understanding the needs that other people, vulnerable people, marginalized people might have. It's that perceiving that to someone else, you are the other, and their perception of you is colored that same way.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we've heard so much over the course of the last couple of days. I don't know how many people I've talked to that said something along the lines of, I just don't understand. Right. And I think, I mean, there are certainly things I do not understand, but I think in a hyper polarized, in a polarized world, we need to do a better job of trying our best to understand the perspectives of those from different perspectives of ourselves. So again, coming back to like, why is the faith community positioned to do that well, or to lead on those conversations?
Well, I would say the faith community is the ideal place for those communications to happen. And currently, faith communities are positioned terribly to do it because so often people characterize faith community, the congregation, as a safe space. They perceive that it's a place where they are going to get spiritual care and maybe learn things, but they're not going to engage in hard conversations. They're going to get geared up for the hard things that will happen to them other places in their life. But, the same way that you'd want to say if your kid or your spouse has an issue with you or has a serious problem, you'd sure hope that they would talk to you first, right? And you would sure hope that if you have a family member, if you have someone you love who is really struggling, even no matter how you might disagree with them, you would hope that you would be the person they would trust the most. Our faith communities are the place that people trust. We know that from polling. Not necessarily everyone doesn't participate in a faith practice. And a lot of people who do not think faith communities are trustworthy. And that is something that our churches and synagogues and mosques have to deal with. And hopefully we will deal with them. But for the people who belong to a church, who belong to a congregation of some kind, that is a place that they trust. And they should be able to have conversations there that they wouldn't necessarily feel as comfortable having somewhere else, not because they're never going to have them somewhere else, but so that they can learn to do it. So what I wish for faith communities is that we would do a thing that I've experienced it most in, of all things, Leadership Austin years ago, where you take people who are not naturally maybe aligned and set up a structure so that they will have an incentive and accountability for having had conversations. And you make it fun, and it serves snacks, of course. But the church, if speaking in my own, Presbyterian way, the church is the place that could say, here's what we want to do. We want to have small group discussions about a thing, and we think everybody doesn't agree. And we know that it is hard, and we know that people do not naturally gravitate toward discussing something they care about with people they know disagree with them. But here's what we're going to do. It's a program of dialogue. It's a system. It's a strategy. And we're just going to do it this way. And even if we all feel a bit weird, it will be okay. And we have to do that in our own congregations, and particularly, I would say, to faith leaders who might be listening to this podcast. You got to team up with people who you're not comfortable with. The church down the street that is way different from your church. If you're a church, the mosque across town that is way different from you guys, get the courage to talk to that leader and say, I would like us genuinely to have a dialogue. And when you do that, when you say we want to have people have a chance to have hard conversations, For Pete's sake, a hard conversation doesn't consist of, bless your heart, I want to know why you have the misguided worldview you do so that I can help you. That is not what we're talking about. A hard conversation is, I don't understand why you think the thing you think, or you do the thing you do, or you voted the way you vote, or whatever. I don't understand that, and I want to. I need help. This is me.
Yeah, I think that's important, and in a polarized world, I think more conversations is better. Trying to bridge those divides is important. And if you look at our episode from 2 weeks ago with Reverend Richie Butler from St. Luke Community United Methodist Church in Dallas, he talked about Project Unity and some of the work they've done in facilitating those conversations. So I'd check out that episode if you're interested in more conversation on that. And certainly over the course of time, Texas Impact will have resources and opportunities for folks to get involved. Anything else before we jump into what actually happened on Election Day and the impact it's going to have?
No, I've lectured you enough.
All right. I'm taking that as a personal. She lectured me there.
I did.
Because I also need to have conversations with folks. I'll have you know, I reached out to 2 people on election night. I'm saying this in front of everybody. I'm sure they're not going to listen to this podcast at all. And said, I need to have lunch with you. And I started texting with one of them and I was like, I can't do it today. We'll follow up in 2 weeks. So, know your limitations, friends.
Know your limitations.
So we did have a big election. Obviously, the presidential race has got a ton of attention. We're not going to talk about that today. There are plenty of sources for you to go think about that. But I do want to talk about what happened here in the great state of Texas and what we can take from that. So what are some of the high level observations from the races here in Texas?
Well, I mean, one observation is I think there are some people who are really frustrated that there wasn't more voter turnout. I will say, I think a lot of people in local communities did a lot of work around voter turnout. And to the extent that it didn't materialize the way that they thought that it might, or they wished that it would, that conversation we were just having about the need to really understand your community and be in relationship, that's important for voter turnout too. You can't just, this isn't transactional. You gotta actually be authentically in relationship with people all the time, not only when you need them to do a thing. So that's a thing. Second, I would say, as far as the House races, it's very clear the governor's influence did matter. There were some races where the governor's candidate won, and that means that his influence, including money and also influence, did matter there. South Texas is getting a lot of attention because a lot of those counties went way red. They voted for Republicans, and there again, if you don't ask people what they're interested in, you're not going to know. The one that is the most hopeful for me, and not hopeful because of a policy, although it happens to be, but also because of what I think it says about the future of possibility of building community in all over the state, is what happened in Amarillo, where they did have a travel ban, an abortion travel ban on the ballot, and it failed. And it was very well resourced. The campaign to pass the travel ban was well resourced, and the people who were against it were very grassroots, and they did prevail, and it was super local. And I think, although it was a super local issue where, sure, you'd say, well, yeah, because that's everybody's in the community. Yeah, but that's the point, is people were able to understand a policy issue. Travel ban is not just a local question. That is ultimately going to be something people might talk about at the state level or the federal level next year. The way that they did their work and built their coalition, that's something that people are going to be talking about for quite a while, I think. So I was pleased with their work, and I was pleased that Texas Impact was able to I would not go to any length of saying that we like provided leadership or something like that. But I was glad that we were able to be in relationship with those folks and work alongside them a little bit.
You mentioned Houston. Anything to add there? I know we had a lot of folks in the Houston area who are doing some really great work on turnout.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be very interested. I know we and everybody else in Houston is going to be really interested to get granular with data. And, you know, it is, there are people who like data and people who don't like data. And I love data. I think a spreadsheet is a thing of beauty. I also think data can tell us, I want to say like hard truths. Data can tell us the same way that election results are data, right? They can tell us something whether we want to know it or not, but or whether it's the answer we want to know. But we can't do better if we don't know. And I think this year, this election, because of all the work that so many groups are doing in Houston, we're certainly faith communities in Houston are doing work. So many other kinds of organizations doing so many different kinds of things in Houston. I've got to think that the data altogether from all of those efforts and all of those different approaches that people have taken with their different constituencies, they are going to yield fascinating data, and they're going to show that some things people didn't work so well. And some things people did work like gangbusters if only they'd have had 10 times as much resources or 10 times as much, volunteers or whatever. Some things people did worked like gangbusters, but they'll only work that way for that one specific group of people. I think that's so important that we take the time before everybody gets all wound up about it's only however many months till the next election. Everybody sit down and do the data analysis and figure out which things mattered. Did they matter in a good way or a bad way? And which of them are replicable? Which ones do we want to say we should do more like this? We should train more people to do this kind of, we should put more resources into it. Which ones do we say it was a good idea, but it didn't ultimately motivate people or help people to cast a ballot? And it's important that we motivate and help people. So we should focus on those things that do.
All right, data nerds, it is your time to shine. Go play with all that data that's been collected. We had one of our speakers on the call on Wednesday morning who said, I have worked so hard for the last few months and I am in my feelings right now. And I just need 2 months to not do anything related to public policy in Texas. And I said, I love that for you. I don't think my boss will let me have 2 months off to not do things.
I won't let that person either.
Yeah. What I said to that person and everybody else on the call is, if you need some time, you need a couple days or, a week or two, holidays are coming up, there are going to be some opportunities. But spoiler, the legislature comes in January and we need to make sure that we are prepared and ready for all of the things that are going to come before the Texas legislature. That said, if she took 2 months, she'd be back just before. So,
yes.
Anyway,
but we're not having 2 months. Nope.
Because we have to prepare. Yep. Nobody gets 2 months. So how does the election change the outlook for the legislature convening in January, and how should folks be responding?
Well, first of all, the election changes nothing about the fact that the legislature will convene January 14th.
Fair.
That's still carved in stone. The biggest change, potentially, not necessarily in terms of extremes, but in terms of degrees, is we knew that immigration was going to be a big issue, and we knew that it's a tough issue here in our state. It has been for a long time. It is potentially tougher now, and one of the reasons that it's tougher is if the election had gone the other way, we would have maybe been looking at a different constellation of federal immigration reform and response to people who are currently undocumented in the United States. Because the election came out the way that it did, we have, on the issue of immigration, more so than maybe any other issue that has nexus with state policy, which tariffs are something we've heard a lot about, but they're not really so much our state policy issue right now. We probably will not have a lot of feelings of support for migrants coming from the federal level, and we already faced a hard situation in our own state. I think what that means is I think for people who are going to do legislative stuff on immigration, that is going to be a trying issue. It is going to be a hard one. And I think people need to know that and be ready for it. And I mean, Vice President Harris says all the time, we like hard work. So everybody who agrees with that needs to get right with what it really means that we like hard work. But I also think there's a different role for faith communities vis-a-vis immigration, and that is people really, really need to understand how local law enforcement in their community interacts with the migrant community. If you have not already had a meeting with representatives of congregations and your sheriff and your police chief, and if you're in a bigger city, the police officer that does the area of the city that your house of worship is in and the area of the city that you know is where there are a lot of businesses that employ undocumented people, you better go have those meetings now, not after Christmas. That is a thing you can do that will have real impact in the legislature when we are talking about how things work. And if the incoming administration does what they say they are going to do, which seems kind of unreal, but if they really move forward with mobilizing the military to deport millions of people, it will be really important to know what that looks like as it is expressing itself in your community.
Just made a note for my local congregation there. Okay. So
note to self.
Yeah, that's obviously a big one.
In addition to immigration, the other issue that I would say, I think there's just a lot up in the air about health. I think healthcare and public health are two issues where incoming President-elect Trump has said things that make people nervous, but not necessarily articulated clearly how those things would happen. I think if I were a person who drinks tap water, I would be concerned about throwing around the idea that we're going to get rid of fluoride in all the public drinking water systems. But there's not the same level of clarity about, do they mean we're going to ban fluoride, or there's going to be an advisory that we ought not to use fluoride, or they're going to say, here's some other things you could do instead of fluoride, like everybody have a personal dentist. So there's not the same level of concreteness as on immigration. And then the one that I think a lot of our members, a lot of people who listen to this podcast maybe would be real concerned about would be climate. The climate negotiations start on Monday. I'm not going this year in person. I am participating virtually, but Becca and Bobby and Beeman are going to be there along with, friends of Texas Impact, Regina Banks and Christine Moffett and other people. When they get there, they will be facing the same thing that we faced in 2016 when Texas Impact staff went to Morocco to the climate negotiations and got there, and people were like, oh my gosh, what just happened in the United States? How is this going to impact everything? I don't know if we'll immediately withdraw from the Paris Agreement again. But this time around, we start in a completely different place, thanks to the past 4 years of the Biden administration, there are projects underway that are not going to get rolled back. The solar and wind are off to the races in Texas in a way that they just were not 4 years ago. So it's not that it's not a problem, but I don't think there's as much, oh my gosh, everything is going to stop in its tracks. People who have electric vehicles, they're not going to get rid of their electric vehicles on January 21st.
All right. Anything else we should be paying attention to as we move towards the legislative session?
You should pay attention to who is your incoming House member, who's your representative, and who's your senator, and you should schedule your first visit with them in the district before Christmas.
Yep. I assume that's the homework for today is to
that would be today's
start
homework.
Those conversations. Yep.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, B, I appreciate it. Anything else before we close out today?
Scott, it's going to be okay. You are going to be okay. You are going to be okay. We're going to be okay. I know it's easy to get wound up in your feelings, but it is going to be okay, and it is policy, and policy is made to change. That is why we have policies, because we change the boundaries sometimes to adapt our community to new circumstances. And we have some policies we don't like right now. We'll have some policies we don't like next year. And when I say we, I mean you and me. And there are going to be some policies that other people do like, and we will not like them. And then later, years later, we will have policies that we like and they will not like them. So it's going to go on. We're going to go on. The country's going to survive.
Amen to all of that. What I'll add to it, especially coming out of the conversations we had yesterday, people are having feelings, and I think many of the speakers said it's important to feel those feelings, and like don't shy away from what you're feeling and do all the things that you need to do. That said, it's a lot easier to do that in community. After we take our time, if we need to go touch some grass by ourselves for a while, Texas Impact has teams. We have folks who are doing this work, and for me, anyway, I won't speak for other people, but it feels a lot better when we're able to reconnect with people who are working towards a common goal, who are working towards this vision for a more just and equitable Texas. And so take your time, experience your feelings, and then let's reconnect and start getting ready for the work that is to come. All right, B, appreciate the time. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Scott.
I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with B. And y'all, I'll encourage you again to take care of yourself this week and reach out to friends that you think could use an extra hug. Get some rest, touch some grass, and prepare yourself for the work that will be required of all of us in the months to come. Before we go, another reminder that Texas Impact has tools for you to engage in the civic engagement and the advocacy work the world is requiring of us in this moment. I hope you'll join one of our teams to connect with other Texans from throughout the state who care about the issues you care about. Check out the website for all of that and more at texasimpact.org. And of course, I hope you'll take a moment to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of faith to advocate for a more just and equitable Texas. If you have questions about any of it, please reach out. You can reach me at scott@texasimpact.org. And with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.